Let's take a breath. I say this each time Rosh Hashanah comes. Not only should we take a breath, and obviously breathe as you'd wish, but I could use a breath. This has been a long year. And every year, it's been a long year. That's what it is when you come to the end of one. So even before I start teaching, I would love to just invite you to envision the year you've been waiting for, and bless you in advance that this coming year should be that year. We'll talk about shofar, yes we will. But we're not detached observers of the impulses of tradition. If we were that, we would just have an academic conversation, talk about the history of this and who said what, not what it means. So at least for me, what I hope we walk away with is a stronger sense of self, an openness of heart and soul to what comes next, and a readiness to march forward into what must be a better year for everybody. So, I'm going to take a breath, grab my guitar. You might know this melody. It was written by Rabbi David Paskin. It's a beautiful melody for learning. Everybody's on mute but me, so I hope you'll sing loud. Okay, here we go. All right, friends, here we go. Word association. You can do this in the chat. You can do it in your imagination. I say shofar. You say. When it comes to the experience of the shofar, each one of us has a different way of internalizing it. Maybe from a place of memory. Maybe you have specific associations from childhood or from adulthood. Maybe it's something that you saw on media. There are many representations of the sounds of shofar. Recently, in political activities, I've seen very different perspectives bring a shofar into organizing. What does a shofar represent, both historically, liturgically, emotionally, spiritually? Where does it come from, and where might it lead us? So Esther's saying, awake. Lucia, I think you're in Italy. So nice to have you with us. Saying, call. A thrill, says Barbara. Right? It's not neutral. That's one of the things about a shofar. It's hard to hear a shofar and imagine there not being a response. And by the way, one of the most beautiful uses of innovation and tradition I've witnessed, I was a synagogue rabbi for a long time, and there were members of my shul who were deaf. What is it to experience a shofar, which is often limited in people's understanding to audio, to something you hear? Well, the people who were deaf that came to shul were holding balloons, because the quivering of the air is a physical sensation. We know, the more we study about physics, that sound and light and matter have a lot in common. If you study string theory, there's a fascinating realization that many scientists have helped us come to, which is that everything shakes. Well, the shofar certainly reminds us of that. So what I'd like to do in our learning today, and I hope that we'll be able to do more over time. It's a limited amount of time that we have for a very beautiful, big conversation. And I really do hope that you use the chat function to share your thoughts. I am sure that someone's going to have an innovation today, a chap, as we say, a chiddush, something new that is actually necessary for all of us. So if it comes to you, please share it. Don't hold it back. In Pirkei Avot, part of the Mishnah 2,000 years ago, a rabbi said, "Ein hakapdan melamed," right? I'll say, cruel people aren't great teachers. Ve'ein habaishan lomed. And if we're too shy, we don't learn everything we need to. So I hope that you'll share your voice in the ways that we can on this platform. I'm going to share my screen, and I'm going to walk us through some sources. Mara has the text packet link, so if you'd like to download the PDF of all of the materials that I'm sharing, it's going to be available in the chat a few times. So please click on that if you'd like. If not, I'm about to share the texts that are in that PDF with everybody. So I'm going to look for a little bit of affirmation. Make sure that I can see you. Can you all see the screen with the text?
Yes, we can see.
Okay. I'm so glad that worked. Sometimes I'm just not sure. Okay. So here's the first text that I wanted to share, and it is applicable in general and specifically this year. Okay, so how so? The Hebrew from Leviticus, Daber el bnei Israel lemor, speak to the children of Israel, saying, B'chodesh hashvi'i be'echad lachodesh, yeh lachem Shabbaton, zichron tru'a mikra kodesh. So I'm going to translate this, but I'm imagining I'm not the only one who sees words like these and says, wait a second. So what do we see? In the 7th month on the 1st of the day. Let's stop there. First of all, it sounds a little bit like Dr. Seuss, right? Horton Hears a Who on the 15th of May in the jungle of Newell, in the heat of the day in the cool of the pool. Anyone a big Dr. Seuss fan like me? Okay, good. Now, on the 7th month, the 1st of the month, wouldn't that strike us as strange? It's not the 7th month, I thought. Tishrei, the 1st month of the Jewish year. So why is it the 7th month? Because, and you might know this already, according to biblical thinking, according to the Torah, the year doesn't begin when we say Rosh Hashanah is. The 7th month, which is the month we're about to begin according to the Torah, is this one. Why would this not be the beginning of the year in the Torah's thinking? Because time begins for a people when the people begins. So for the Torah, the 1st month is the month of Nisan, with the holiday of Pesach, of Passover, because that's when we were born. So let's recognize a radical claim being made. If we're not marking the beginning of the Jewish journey as a nation, what are we marking again? Hayom Harat Olam, we say on Rosh Hashanah. Today is the birthday of the world. What a radical claim that our high holy days are actually not about a Jewish story. It's about the world. Every blade of grass, the animals, nature itself, the environment, climate, every human being, not just my tribe. Isn't that an amazing realization? That according to the Torah, which is mainly concerned with the Jewish journey, the year begins then. But for us, especially as we're going to return to this idea of shofar very quickly, for us, we're marking something bigger than our tribe. What an important thing to remember. Now, moving into the verse without scrolling anywhere yet. What happens on the 1st day of the 7th month, which for us, liturgically, will be the 1st day of the 1st month? Isn't it interesting when we believe differently than the Torah, even though it's our Torah? And we kiss it, and we face it, and we love it, and we learn it, and we disagree often. Isn't it amazing? I love this stuff. What happens on that day? Zichron tru'a mikra kodesh. So this translation says, a remembrance of the sounding of the shofar, a holy assembly. A holy assembly is kind of foofy as a translation. Mikra kodesh means holy time. But zichron tru'a, the memory of shofar, the memory of the sound of the shofar, right? You know the tru'ah is one of the names of one of the sounds of the shofar, and we're going to get to those specific sounds in a second. But what does it mean to have a remembrance of a sound? I hope you know I'm not asking these questions rhetorically. I'm asking the questions wondering if anyone's going to type in their own thoughts into the chat. I see I'm getting nods and resonance, but let's think together. Let's contribute to the conversation. Zoom was not made for passive receiving. Even Zoom can be a place of being with each other. So, a remembrance of the sound of the shofar? I thought it was a day for the shofar. Which shofar am I remembering? How many shofars have there been? And this year, you might know, and I know communities do this differently around the world. Very good. I saw Yochanan did it, right? Remembrance, especially if Rosh Hashanah is on Shabbat. And Carol, yes, we're going to get there. The shofar happens at Mount Sinai. Wait, Mount Sinai? I thought that was about Shavuot. There's so much confusion if we don't really look at the sources and realize the liturgical choices being made. Each holiday has depth. Each holiday has its own meaning, and therefore the shofar can sound differently depending on our framework. Its meaning shifts based on how it's used. In terms of tradition, I want to give Yochanan full credit because we say when Rosh Hashanah, which is 2 days, includes a Shabbat, on that Shabbat we don't blow shofar, which I gotta tell you, makes my heart break. We also don't sing Avinu Malkeinu when it's on Shabbat. And who decided that? I can get behind the meanings and I respect tradition, but I make it a point, I usually lead services as a guest cantor at a synagogue in New Jersey, that if we're not going to sing Avinu Malkeinu, because tradition says we shouldn't, the prayer on the page before, we are going to sing to the melody of Avinu Malkeinu. How can we not? Just crying out, what? For what? For memory, for the meaning. So, it is so powerful to see the Torah's phrasing as malleable like this. On the first day of the 7th month, remember the shofar. Even if you aren't going to blow it, think about it, hear its memory in your head. What an interesting idea. Okay, we're not done with this verse, but for now I'm going to scroll past it. Okay? Never say that about a verse of the Torah, I'm going to scroll past it, but, I got to. So even though we pointed to Mount Sinai, and by the way, I see, Meryl, you're saying not 2 days for Reform Jews. I know that that's true. It's one of the interesting things in the Jewish world that different communities, different movements, different ideologies shift the way that we observe. In the Talmud, Rosh Hashanah lasts 2 days, but it's called a Yoma Arichta, a very long one day. So all I'll say is that the Talmud knows that 2 days can be 1 day. And I know that a shul that celebrates Rosh Hashanah for 1 day is 2 days worth of meaning in my heart. So I'm pretty sure we all do Rosh Hashanah. So I'm glad we're all here learning about it together. And who knows? Who knows? I can see different Reform shuls do 1 or 2 days. I love the variety of Jewish practice. I'm sure that our ancestors are both chuckling and smiling, because here we are trying to figure out how to do the things they were trying to figure out how to do too. So good. Okay. And I could have so much fun just going and being in conversation with these chats. Mara, what do I do? I'm having so much fun here. Susie asked, how will we be redeemed if we all go our own way? So let me answer that from my heart of hearts and then get back to the topic. I believe we're all going to be redeemed. And the how isn't my decision. I believe that when we act with authenticity and integrity, we are acting in concert with what our ancestors, and if I might dare say, God would want of us. We don't act out of capriciousness. We don't only make decisions based on convenience. And especially this group here on My Jewish Learnings, learning for Rosh Hashanah, we're showing up. We want to learn and grow. How could it be better than that? That's not our own way. We somehow share this. we could share a whole lot more, including redemption. So, okay, thank you for asking. And I so love the question, and I'm so happy to be learning with all of you. And I just want to talk with all of you and not look back at the sheets. But I'm going to look back at the sheets because I promised. Okay. Even though we were already talking about Rosh Hashanah and Sinai, it's important to know that the classic understanding of Shofar is related, at least when it comes to Rosh Hashanah, goes back to the Akedah, the binding of Isaac, which we read on Rosh Hashanah. It is one of the hardest parts of the Torah, at least for me. And the shofar taps right into it. So let's go directly to the verse and one midrash, one rabbinic interpretation, and then do something with that. I'm not convinced we will see this and read this and feel about this in any uniform way, but that wouldn't be very Jewish of us either. Right? So let's look at the verse. This is Genesis 22:13. Vayisa Avraham et einav. Oh, this is such a hard verse. Every verse of the Akedah. If any one of us is the one who reads Torah on Rosh Hashanah, I'm just giving you full strength and appreciation. It's not an easy one to read. Vayisa Avraham et einav. Abraham lifted his eyes. Vayar v'hinei ayil. And he saw, behold, there was a ram. Achar, another. Ne'echaz basfach bekarnav. Caught in the thicket by its horns. There's some great gospel songs, The Ram in the Thicket. If you don't know it, it's really great to hear. I don't know if it would work on Rosh Hashanah, but it's kind of cool. Vayelech Avraham, Vaikach et ha'ayil, and Abraham went and he took the ram. Vaya'alehu le'olah tachat beno, and he offered it up as an olah, as a sacrifice, in place of his son. The ram. Now, I know we know this. I'm assuming we all are familiar with the story. But I would not so simply say, let's look at this verse as if we've never seen it before. As if we never experienced the fullness of the story. And you and I are looking at the binding of Isaac for the first time. And speaking personally, I'm in shock at every facet of the story. Either God's willingness to test Avram in this way, if it's not a test, God's command to do this, Abraham's willingness, Isaac's almost silence. There's so much, and commentators throughout the generations have had so much to say about this. I don't want to try to talk about the binding of Isaac except to say that it makes my heart hurt. And it makes me really wonder sometimes why we read it on Rosh Hashanah, except I think one possible answer is right in front of us. Look at the Talmud that's on your screen. Rosh Hashanah is the book, page 16a. Rabbi Abahu said, why do we blow shofar out of a shofar that's made out of a ram's horn? Why is that how we do it? There are lots of different animals. The Holy Blessed One said, sound a blast before me with a shofar made from a ram, so that I will remember for you the binding of Isaac, son of Abraham, in whose stead a ram was sacrificed, and I will ascribe it to you as if you had bound yourselves before me. We only have a total of an hour, but I could spend lifetimes on this. And again, I'm not trying to project upon you my own emotional response, but this is a very hard interpretation of a very hard text. How many things about this make me wonder? And please, I'm just going to keep on encouraging you. If you have thoughts, responses, the chat is yours. We are each other's. Learning has to be voice and voice. How does Rabbi Abahu know what God said? I really wonder. And yes, as Greta said, it emphasizes our vulnerability or even peril, because truth is, year in, year out, especially the longer we live, I don't take for granted that I'm going to have next year. I beg for it. I beg for my children, for my wife, for my community, for our world. But vulnerability is certainly the name of Rosh Hashanah's big impulse. You know, when we get to the final moment of the Avodah service on Yom Kippur, you might not know because a lot of Machzarim skip this section, and actually a lot of people skip Avodah even if the Machzor doesn't. But it's one of the most beautiful, tremulous moments where when the high priest emerges from the Holy of Holies on the most vulnerable and holy day, from the most vulnerable personal position, because we didn't know that he would make it, right? The tradition has it that we would tie a crimson thread around the waist of the high priest to help them out, just in case, because we couldn't go in. But when he emerges, the prayer is that there wouldn't be another earthquake. You want to talk about trembling? The whole earth, and the high priest, and our hearts, maybe even God. There's trembling happen. So the first question is, where does Rabbi Abahu know this? Okay, I don't have the answer to that. Yes, by the way, Barbara, thank you for this. We do stop to think, and this reminds us of our situation, and it does remind us of the test. And I wouldn't suggest one meaning when it comes to such a powerful text, but I would say that the reminder can hurt. It doesn't only help. Maybe the hurt can help, but it's not simple. So look at the meaning within what Rabbi Abahu suggests God said. God said, blow a shofar from a ram's horn, and I will remember the binding of Isaac. But what is the position that we are in, that God will remember us as if? Look very closely at this. I will ascribe it to you as if you had bound yourselves before me. We are not in the position of Abraham, who classically is understood as being tested by God. We are in the position of Isaac. And Isaac is not described as having been bound by Abraham. Isaac is described by Rabbi Abahu, or at least described by God, according to Rabbi Abahu, as having bound himself. Now, again, I don't want to say this is what you do with a text like that. But when we think about the sounds of the shofar, it's important to see some of the ways that tradition has reflected upon the use of shofar itself. Why a shofar? Why from a ram? Vulnerability absolutely points to it. Sacrifice absolutely has a lot to do with it. It's so powerful. Yes, Lucia agreed. It's not about human sacrifice, but it is about self-sacrifice in this text. And please God, it should be, as Jay just wrote, God saying, I will be there for you. It's very complicated. It's very emotional. But this text is not meant to leave us feeling abandoned. It's meant to make us feel close. So I'm going to look at what some of us wrote, and then I'm going to move forward in the text. But I really appreciate the way that we're writing, especially, Pam, the acknowledgement that the word bound makes us feel uncomfortable. And maybe, as Rebecca wrote, bound like tefillin. These are very, very big phrases and words, and the rabbis weren't shy about what they thought it might mean. We shouldn't be either. And yes, Rachel, the more we learn about Talmud, the more we know that one opinion, first of all, is pretty boring, and certainly it's not very Jewish, right? Rarely is there consensus on this. So I appreciate the question. Let's move into the text a little bit forward, knowing that we haven't resolved anything. But what we are gaining, and I'll emphasize this, is a shared vocabulary. Reading these texts, the Akedah, right, the binding of Isaac, as a ritual recitation on Rosh Hashanah, and these teachings around what it means to blow shofar, it means we can have a conversation where we're all tapping into the same library, the same psychic vocabulary. This is what a lot of educators call a schema. It's a map of things associated with one originating thought or word. Again, I say shofar, you say, Well, we're gaining more words and more ideas. Even if we've been familiar, we sang hafochba, let's turn it over and over again, because something new will come out of it. What a gift it is to share the it, you and me right now. So here is another use of shofar. This goes to Mount Sinai, as some of us were saying early on in our learning. Vayihi vayom hashlishi. Actually, my wife Neshama has a beautiful melody to this. If you're looking for a great album, it's called Ani Shalach, I Am Yours. And you'll hear her sing gorgeous music to this verse. Vayihi vayom hashlishi, and behold, on the third day, biot boker, when it was morning, vayihi kolot uvrakim. These translations are interesting. There were voices and thunders. This is translating as thunder and lightning, but kolot actually means voices. We'll talk about that maybe another time. Ve'anan kaved al hahar, and a cloud heavy upon the mountain. Ve'kol shofar chazak me'od, and the sound of the shofar, the voice of the shofar, was very strong. Vayecherad and all the people who were in the camp trembled. So, friends, what did they do when they heard shofar? Maybe the same thing that I do, maybe what you do, tremble. I try to be close, by the way, to the front of the shul, because even if there is amplification, there's a great halachic debate, a great Jewish legal debate, whether or not I can fulfill my obligation to hear the shofar if I hear it through a device. When that's all we could do because of the pandemic or because of accessibility issues that aren't about the pandemic, I would, of course, say, yes, that fulfills my obligation. But when I have a choice to be in the presence of the air quivering from the original sound, what can compare physically with that? And like the example I shared with you before, holding a balloon so that when the air quivers, regardless of my ability to hear through my ears, my body experiences the sound. That's what we did on the mountain. Now, by the way, let me ask an obvious question. What shofar? Who was blowing the shofar? I understand, not that I really understand, but I understand in the story of Mount Sinai, of receiving the Torah, that the whole mountain was shaking. I understand the cloud and the smoke and the fire. Again, not that I truly understand it, but I accept that scene. But when it says explicitly, V'kol shofar chazak me'od, the sound of the shofar was very loud. What shofar? And who was blowing the shofar? What is this verse talking about? And by the way, just so you know, there's no great answer to that question. What does the shofar signify here? Different than the binding of Isaac, right? Even if they're both intense, even if they're both connected with God, even if they are both primal in their sound, what is this? And we don't have a great answer. I'm not going to be providing a great answer. I think the question is a very big question that we need to ask. So what does it mean? There are lots of interpretations over the generations when it comes to what shofar is. Yes, Scott wrote the sound of revelation. Yes, but that's like me using the word holy to describe the meaning of the word kadosh. They're both beautiful words, but I don't really know what either one of them means. So what does revelation sound like? Oh, it sounds like a shofar. Where did the shofar come from? Revelation. But what does it mean? And who was blowing it? So let's look at some of the meanings that one of the earliest commentators, Rabbi Sadia Gaon, after the Talmud, offered when it came to the sound of the shofar. So number one, I'm not going to read all of these. You can skim them. But number one is, the day is the beginning of creation when God created the world and ruled over it. So is that about Sinai? No. It doesn't mean Sinai. It doesn't mean the binding of Isaac. It means the birth of the world. At the beginning of a king's reign, they sound the trumpets and shofars to promulgate in all occasions that a new reign has begun. Likewise, we accept upon ourselves God's reign on this day by sounding the shofar. So isn't that interesting? This isn't about the trembling at Revelation. This isn't about the binding of Isaac. This is about inauguration. This is the beginning of the reign of God. And by the way, if you're in shul right at the beginning of Shacharit, right, one of the morning prayers, the morning prayer, we start with the word Hamelech. And if you're trying to get ready for Rosh Hashanah, and I am, nothing helps more than hearing a little bit of the melodies. So I'm just going to hum a little bit because it begins the word Hamelech. Hamelech. And services always include that word, but usually tucked into the verse before. It is the beginning of the main services of that day to inaugurate God. I remember hearing a rabbi once say it was an election year. Election had just passed by, or maybe, yeah. It was right after an election had happened. He said, I know that all of you watched the inauguration of the President of the United States, but how many of you missed the inauguration of the ruler of the universe because you came too late to shul today? Right? That's actually one of the central motifs. And so the shofar might be the announcement that God has arrived. As strange as that is, because when wasn't God here? But that God is in charge, which might not be your theology. But it is a central idea in Rosh Hashanah's language. So, looking again, number one, God is the ruler. Number two, shake me up so I can do tshuva, so I can repent. Number three, Mount Sinai. All right, this is a lot for one sound. Four, the prophets. When a prophet does their work, it sounds pretty shrill. It makes the air tremble, and it's hard to hear. By the way, I like your suggestion that it's the angels blowing the shofar on Mount Sinai. That's cool. I don't know what that means, but it's very cool. And if you continue moving forward in Sadia Gaon's list, which is still on your screen, 5, the destruction of the Holy Temple, because when the shofar blows, it's not a gentle sound. Maybe it's hurt in the air, loss, grief. I don't know if any of you are fans of The Princess Bride as much as I am. I did Dr. Seuss, and I'm going to do Princess Bride. I hope I get extra points here. In The Princess Bride, there's a moment. I'll bring us back to our faces for a moment. In The Princess Bride, there's a moment where the man, and if you don't know the plot, this is going to be totally lost on you, but go with me. Where Wesley, who's known as the Man in Black, is being tortured, and he is going to miss the chance to save the woman he loves. And no one knows where he is because he's hidden inside a tree underground, except the people looking for him hear the sound of his scream. And someone else who went through great grief says, my heart made that sound when I lost my father. The Man in Black makes that sound now. I'm invoking it because you can read Rabbi Sadia Gaon from around the year 800 and say, that's a spiritual commentary on a sound that we do every year. It's a ritual. No, how does Rabbi Sadia Gaon know what hurt sounds like? I say it to you with real emotion in my own eyes. Maybe the shofar is revelation, inauguration, reminder, and pain. Maybe I'm not only trembling because of the good things I'm hoping for. Maybe I've had a hard year. Maybe I'm remembering who's not in the room as the shofar is blowing today. Maybe what Hedda was suggesting, that the angels are blowing shofar, maybe I miss my ancestors, and those are the angels that I hear in the shofar's sound. It could be all of these things. It could be, as Jamie's writing, could be the sound of childbirth. It could be it could be the sound of the ram. It could be all of this. So I share this with you not to distract us from the point, except to say that when we actually explore Not sure what just happened. Can you see the text? No. All right.
Not
So
right now.
I have to stop sharing. I have to find the text. All right, give me a second, friends. I want to make sure that we have it on our screens. I'm not sure where it went, but I'm going to find it. I don't know what I'm doing. Let's see.
Rabbi, if it's helpful for me to share, I'm happy to.
Thank you. I appreciate it, but I'm going to I did it. Tell me if it works this time, and if not, I'm going to rely on you.
Yeah.
Do you see the text?
Yes.
Oh, good. It's been 3.5 years. I better know how to do this. Okay. Thank you, everybody, for your patience. My apologies. All right, so if you look at this list, it goes through multiple meanings. I'm not looking to exhaust our eyes with one list, but I want to say that the infinite number of human experiences that we have through our lives and that we've had through our people's history, they're all present in the sound of the shofar. Look at this. This is a very interesting one. Moving forward in time to Rambam, to Maimonides. And to your question, by the way, Jay, doesn't the creation of the world begin with light and not sound? What's interesting is, didn't God have to say, let there be light? So you're right, but I don't know, and not exactly, but I wasn't there. So I think we're all just doing our best with the most cosmic of questions, knowing that, I don't know. Knowing that we don't know. Maybe that's great. Okay. So this is what Rambam says. The sounds of the shofar we're going to focus on a little bit. The tru'ah that the Torah discusses due to the many years of exile. So hear the tone. And Maimonides is writing in a moment of great Jewish belonging, right? The Golden Age in Spain and also in Egypt. He was a physician in the court. He's not coming from a place necessarily of Jewish degradation, even though there were always moments of this throughout time. He's talking about history. This tru'ah that the Torah discusses, the verse we read, due to the many years of exile, we are unsure what it is. I love when the most rationalist of the Jewish thinkers says, I just don't know. That's deeply comforting to me. Maimonides not only was brilliant, he also knew he was brilliant. So for him to acknowledge that he didn't know makes me feel warm, makes me feel at home in his teaching. It may be, and this is what, I forget who said it before, but you get lots of points, that the wail of the woman wail amongst themselves. Now, he's not talking about childbirth, and clearly there are gender things for us to talk about here. I'm going to leave Rambam in his time and not speak like that in my own. But using this text without trying to defend it or explain it or rewrite it, when women cry, it may be the sigh that one does one after the other while they are worried about a great stress. If we were all off of mute, and I asked you, how's this year been? First of all, I hope that you'd remember to count the blessings. But I also imagine we would make a few sounds. I have this memory of my great uncle, Ralph Dubin, who would sit down on the couch hard. And when he would sit down, it was always a sound like, huh. And he wasn't being silly. He didn't have an easy life. And I think when he sat down, he let some of that sound out. So on Rosh Hashanah, we get to sit down. And we get to let some sound out. But that's only one of the meanings, according to Rambam, it might be. Look what else he says. It may also be both together. The crying and the sighing. A sigh followed by a cry. By the way, tekiah, one sound. Shvarim, 3 sounds. Tru'ah, staccato, lots of sounds. Some say 7, some say 9. Maybe it's a sigh followed by a cry. Maybe it's ragged breathing. He didn't say, but I am. This may be called tru'ah, as this is the way of a warrior. Not a warrior, but a worrier. To first sigh and then cry. We therefore do all the options. That's Jewish. Right, this is all great meaning. Let's do it all. Throw it all in there. Then he says Hayilala. Yilala, for those who don't know, is actually a ritual in Yemen, in old Yemenite tradition and current Taimani communities. Yilalot were people, typically women, who were hired at funerals to cry loudly. It wasn't only a Jewish practice in the ancient world, but we have record of it in our own tradition too. Maybe that's the shofar. The crying, the yilalot in the Hebrew here, refers to what we call tru'ah. The repeated sighs refer to what we call 3 shvarim. Oh. So we're not talking about the tekiyah, the whole sound. We're talking about the second and third sounds. So the shvarim are repeated sighs. I'm not asking you to make the sound, but and then tru'ah, crying that comes after I actually let myself sigh. By the way, just being a little bit personal here, as I just did those 3 sighs, I know I was doing it to demonstrate, but it was hard not to feel some things as I did that. Maybe I'm encouraging you to experiment on your own. It's interesting what sound does, isn't it? What the physical experience of sound does. So this is Rambam, who had a different way of expressing the possible meanings of the shofar than Saadia Gaon, who we looked at a second ago. And I'd like to bring us back in time. Back to the Talmud for a second. So as you see the top of the screen here, this is from Rosh Hashanah, the same book that we were in before, the tractate, page 27a. 2 sounds from one source or person cannot be discerned. Right? You ever hear like a cacophonous sound? I actually have that experience weekly with my Jewish learning. When I lead Kaddish and we all unmute in order to say Kaddish, I don't hear one voice, I hear all of our voices. And even though I can't discern one thread of one sentence, that sound is incredibly holy to me. I can't make sense of it, but that's not what it's about. In order to understand something, it's hard to hear 2 things at the same time. I have 5 kids. I often have to say one of you at a time. Because I want to hear, I want to understand. But if I were looking for demonstration that my children are alive, all 5 at once is fine. In order to understand, it needs to be one at a time. So look at what the Talmud says here. And this was the miracle at Sinai, in which the people heard both Zachor, right, remember Shabbat, and also Shamor, keep Shabbat, in a single divine utterance. We say that, by the way, every Friday night when we sing L'chadodi, we say Shamor v'Zachor b'dibur achad. Shamor, observe, Zachor, remember, in one utterance. Somehow God said one thing and it meant 2 things. But 2 sounds from 2 different sources of people cannot be properly discerned, which leads some communities not to have multiple people blow shofar at the same time. It's interesting how careful we can be, and also how we search for meaning and try to make sure that it's communicable. But look much later in time. I jumped 2,000 years from the top to the bottom of your screen. Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, said in 1963 that blowing the shofar is the unique and special mitzvah, which is an integral obligation of Rosh Hashanah. The mitzvah of shofar is not a gathering of multiple musical instruments, but rather it is by necessity one. Furthermore, it's not a complex instrument that is capable of playing exceptional compositions. Now, if any of you really plays horn, I had a friend who was a tuba player for the San Francisco Symphony who blew shofar at shul, and he'd always look at me and saying, "What sound do you want?" And I was like, "Sad." That's all I would say to him, or angry, or strong, or because he could have made anything happen. So I think Schneerson didn't know my friend Peter. Okay, but let's go with the Rebbe for a moment. The shofar is perforce a simple animal horn, and as our sages say, all sounds are kosher for shofar as long as it makes a sound. Kosher, which by the way might mean all the emotions associated with the sounds of the shofar are kosher too. The shofar emphasizes that our presence of mind must be first and foremost focused on the individual. You ever think about that? I have this image in my mind. We're all standing together. When my children were younger, I would have them under my tallis with me when we were blowing shofar. We're all having the same experience, but actually, no, we're not. We're all in the same place, and we're each having an experience, but even if we're very close to each other emotionally or physically, it's not the same. It has to be focused on the individual. We have one instrument and one sound because I'm only one person, and I can barely handle that sound. Because of all of its resonances, I can barely handle it. I don't know what to do with myself when I think about the binding of Isaac. I don't know how to stand at Sinai. I don't know what it is really to talk about God as ruler when I'm looking at the world that ruler rules and see what's happening in it. It's very hard, and it's so gorgeous to see the way tradition gives us permission to feel what we feel as individuals. Our emphasis, he says at the very end of the screen, must be on infusing holiness even into the common parts of our daily lives. Then the focus shifts to how the individual is part of the community. So, community. I hope you can see each other's faces, not just mine. I change it to gallery view because it's much more fun like that. I wonder what we're bringing into this Rosh Hashanah this year. And I wouldn't presume to tell anyone, nor is this the place where I'm looking for therapy. I'm just saying, it's been a hard year. It's also been a year of healing, a year of growth. We, by definition, because we're right here, we made it. We're going to make it. That's not a light thing to say these years. But I bless you that you should feel it to your core, so that the emotions that well up in moments of meaning are welcome. We have to I know I'm being a little bit too rabbinic here, but thanks for the permission you're giving me. We have to feel invited to feel. The shofar makes the moment full, too full, over full. It is a primal call, either from the creation of the universe, whatever that sounded like, or Isaac's heart on the altar, whatever that sounded like, or angels blowing the shofar in Mount Sinai, whatever that means, or the inauguration of a new moment where the world might, please God, start to make sense again. I don't know what that looks like yet, but it feels like all of this. The world offers all of this, and some of it we want and some of it we don't, but we don't really get a choice. The longer we live, we'll feel more of it. Loss and love, possibility and pain. The shofar contains all of this. Saadia Gaon had a list of 10. They were communal moments. Rambam had a list of, I think, 4 or 5, and they were subjective, and they weren't entirely communal, and they weren't every kind of moment. And then Schneerson gave us permission to feel what we feel as individuals before trying to connect as a community. Rosh Hashanah is the birthday of the world, but it is also mine and yours. It's an invitation to start again. And I don't know that I'm ready for it, but the shofar isn't asking, are you ready? The shofar is screaming, wake up, feel, come back to life. And the examples being given by tradition are all incredibly powerful. None of them are gentle. I had the experience with a really amazing person whose name was Matt. His name is Matt. 6'10", huge guy from Texas. And he came to shul because he was interested in Judaism. But he wasn't sure. So he said, his first thing was he was going to read all of Abraham Joshua Heschel's The Prophets. That was the first Jewish book he was going to read. And if you've ever read it, let me say it this way, if you've ever tried to lift it, you know that is a very heavy book, and a heavy book to begin with. Most people who are deeply involved as Jews have not read the entirety of that book. But my friend Matt decided that's where he was going to start, and he did. He said, and I'm going to come to synagogue for the first time on Rosh Hashanah. I'm like, really? Really? You're going to try to do all of it like that? And he did. And this enormous human being named Matt, who read Heschel's The Prophets and came to Rosh Hashanah for his first time in synagogue, came to me crying at the end of services Rosh Hashanah morning. And he looked at me crying and said, "It's real." I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "That sound. It's real." I learned more from him in that moment than I have ever learned about Shofar from reading books. To come into this with an attuned, open heart, ready to feel. So I want to look at just a little bit more with you, knowing that we're not going to exhaust the meanings of Shofar, and inviting you to be the next voice in these commentaries. What does Shofar feel like to you? Yes, Jay, exactly as you said it. I'm going to recite your words as part of our teaching for today. Thank you for them. The shofar is one sound, but everyone's reaction, everyone's response to the sound may be different, and each individual's reaction to the sound may change depending on one's circumstances at the time. Yes, and please God, what Stephanie wrote, it should feel like hope too. Not always, but definitely. Why not? Please let it feel like hope. So just a little bit more, friends, and then we're going to, I don't want to call it a day. I'm having too much fun, but here we go. Okay, you can see the text, yeah? Okay. So I'm scrolling down. And remember, friends, you can download the PDF when we're done in case I went too fast through any of it. This is a dear friend of mine, a teacher, Rabbi Matt Berkowitz, lives in Israel now. It is for this reason I believe that we are granted the gift of multiple calls of the shofar. Tekiah means that which is rude. Shvarim means that which is broken. Tru'ah refers to an image of shaking. That's etymologically true. As we enter the Yamim Noraim, the days of awe, we are, as the Tekiah called of shofar, we are fixed and rooted, hardened by our routines. Look where Matt went with the idea of being rooted. Calloused, encased, the way trees grow xylem and phloem on the outside, which makes bark. Elul, this month that we're in, presents us with a challenge of becoming shvarim, of examining and critiquing ourselves so that we can break ourselves, a little bit like Leonard Cohen here, so the light can get in. Be able to shake ourselves out of a spiritual malaise, and we close with the Tekiah Gdolah. I hear my father's voice calling for Tekiah Gdolah. This is how he would call for it in shul. Tekiah Gdolah. So quiet. And the contrast with the boom of the shofar that would then happen. We close with the Tekiah Gdolah, a great loud sound representing the rebirth of the self. By the end of Yom Kippur, with the help of God, we've managed to build ourselves up again to a new and passionate whole. Perhaps this is the meaning, says Matt, of Rashi's commentary on Deuteronomy, where the verse states, "The Lord your God commands you this day, Hayom, to observe these laws and rules, observe them faithfully with all your heart and soul." That verse, what does Rashi, the commentator, say? That the meaning is, every day should be fresh in your eyes, as if the Torah were commanded you on this day, which means Sinai is the birth of the world. If I stand on Sinai and I hear shofar, and it reminds me that today is the day, First of all, why would I wait till tomorrow? Today it begins. And even with the binding of Isaac, which I can't possibly synthesize or sum up or even respond to well, maybe it's just all ahead of me. If the binding of Isaac wasn't the end, neither should this day be. This is the beginning. So Matt closes by saying to approach Judaism with a fresh set of eyes and a renewed sense of purpose is ultimately the goal of this period of repentance. And then he's such a rabbi. May we each strive for such renewal and emerge from the heightened sanctity of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. But then he says, each of us as a Tekiah Gdolah. It's very hard to blow shofar. I'm not great at it, but I wait during that last Tekiah Gdolah for the beginning of the sound to then get a little shaky and then maybe get strong again. I'll give the last word to Rabbi Jill Jacobs, who's a classmate of mine. The shofar reveals a secret. Wholeness and brokenness cannot be from one another. As we do cheshbon hanefesh, a personal accounting, and delve deeper into ourselves, we may find cracks that we never before noticed. Only a sincere encounter with this brokenness will allow us to put ourselves back together again, more whole than before. So let me close with this, friends. What a gift it is to prepare for Rosh Hashanah. What a gift it is to do it with you. How important it is for me to be open, and I'll just use me when I mean we, actually, but for me to be open to finding cracks that I didn't know were there, and to believing in the possibility of light pouring through those cracks, allowing for the possibility of every emotion that I'm feeling to be welcomed by God, to know that we didn't choose the easy texts to read on Rosh Hashanah because the world deserves better than my ease. The world is going to require all of our emotions so that it can, in the words of my teacher Matt, who walked into shul that day, it can all be real through us. So I bless you to feel what you feel, and to keep on growing, and to keep on learning, and to have a year of health, a year of safety. Please God, a year of peace. Shana Tova, everyone. Thanks for learning together with me.
Shana Tova, everyone. Thank you so much, Rabbi.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.